They called it Imperium Sine Fine, an empire without end. But beneath Rome's polished marble and immortal legends lies a history carved not in glory, but in blood. This was no mere nation. It was a machine of conquest, driven by fire, iron, and fear. Where Rome advanced, resistance was not subdued. It was annihilated. Entire cultures disappeared beneath its legions, their names erased, their cities wiped from memory. Its dominion reshaped the world, but at a cost few dared to consider. What we remember as civilization, others experienced as devastation. And history has not forgotten. Crucifixion as state terror. To defy Rome was not only to risk death, it was to invite a death that would serve as a lesson to thousands. Crucifixion was not merely execution, it was political theatre. Known to the Romans as crux, this form of punishment stood as a towering warning. To rebel was to be broken, slowly, publicly, and without mercy. Used primarily against slaves, rebels, and the lowest ranks of society, crucifixion became a calculated instrument of fear during Rome's expansion. The message was clear. Submission meant survival. Resistance meant obliteration. During the Third Servile War, the infamous rebellion led by Spartacus, Rome made an example so horrifying it echoes through the centuries. After finally crushing the slave army in 71 BCE, the Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus ordered the crucifixion of over 6,000 survivors along the Appian Way, the very road that led into the capital. Their bodies lined the highway for over 100 miles, a grim procession of Rome's absolute dominance. The Roman historian Appian records that Crassus crucified them along the Appian Way, turning the road into a chilling warning against future uprisings. And it worked. No slave rebellion ever again reached the scale of Spartacus's revolt. But this punishment was not reserved only for Rome's enslaved. Any provincial uprising, Judea, Gaul, Britannia, could end with mass crucifixions, carried out not as justice but as spectacle. Posts were left upright in conquered cities, sometimes for months, as silent threats. Crucifixion was not just an act of cruelty. It was imperial policy. Pain became propaganda. And in this, Rome perfected a form of psychological warfare that no conquered people could ignore. Erasing Carthage from history. Few acts of Roman aggression embody such cold finality as the destruction of Carthage. This was not simply a victory. It was the obliteration of a rival civilization. Known as Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. This phrase echoed through the Roman Senate, most famously uttered by the statesman Cato the Elder, who ended every speech with it, regardless of topic. His call became a prophecy fulfilled in 146 BCE at the end of the Third Punic War. Carthage, once a dominant maritime power and the only force in the Western Mediterranean to rival Rome, had already been defeated in 2 earlier wars. But it was not enough. Rome sought more than triumph. It wanted assurance that Carthage would never rise again. And so, under the command of Scipio Aemilianus, Rome laid siege to the city for over 2 years. When Carthage finally fell, the result was a complete razing. Ancient sources such as Appian report that the city burned for over a week. Its inhabitants, men, women, and children, were either taken as slaves or killed. The city itself was dismantled, stone by stone. Much has been debated about the tale that Roman soldiers sowed salt into the land to curse it with infertility. Modern scholars often consider this apocryphal. But the symbolism remains. Rome didn't just defeat Carthage, it buried it, metaphorically and literally, under the weight of its own supremacy. In this act, we see a chilling principle of Roman warfare. Some enemies were not to be subdued, but to be forgotten. Rome would not share the world, it would consume it, wiping out entire cities in Gaul. When Julius Caesar turned his gaze northward, toward Gaul in the mid-1st century BCE, it was not merely conquest he sought, it was transformation. Gaul, known to the Romans as a land of fiercely independent tribes, The region became the proving ground for one of the most ruthless campaigns in Roman military history. Over nearly a decade, Caesar led his legions in a brutal expansion that claimed the lives of many. Some cities were completely destroyed, effectively ceasing to exist. Perhaps the most notorious example is the siege of Avaricum in 52 BCE. The city, located in what is now central France, resisted Roman control during the broader Gallic revolt, led by the chieftain Vercingetorix. Caesar, whose Commentari de Bello Gallico remains our primary source, described Avaricum as the most beautiful city in all Gaul. However, beauty offered no protection. After a prolonged siege, the Roman legions breached the defences, and what followed was systematic destruction. Caesar himself recorded that nearly the entire population of around 40,000 was put to the sword, sparing almost no one. This was not an isolated incident. The Gallic Wars were marked by similar fates befalling towns that resisted too strongly or for too long. Cities such as Cenabum, Noviodunum, and Uxellodunum were either burned to the ground, depopulated, or enslaved wholesale. Caesar deliberately implemented a policy of terror to crush revolts in Gaul. At Uxellodunum, he wrote that he cut off the hands of surrendering warriors to make them a living warning. These acts were not excesses of war, they were deliberate demonstrations of Roman resolve. By erasing entire urban centres, Caesar ensured that rebellion would not merely be punished, it would be rendered unthinkable. In Gaul, Rome was not just building an empire, it was stamping out alternatives to its rule, one city at a time. Forced. Starvation in Roman siege warfare. Starvation was not an unfortunate byproduct of Roman siege warfare. It was a calculated strategy. In both the Republic and Imperial eras, Roman commanders turned hunger into a weapon as effective as the sword. When a city defied Roman demands, it was not always assaulted immediately. Instead, it was often sealed off, its supply lines severed, and its people left to endure the slow, crushing pressure of famine. This tactic was codified in Roman military thinking. Denying access to food and water wore down both morale and physical resistance, making conquest less costly for Roman forces. The ancient historian Frontinus, in his Stratagems, described this as a wise economy of blood, a way to subdue without exhausting Roman strength. One of the most harrowing examples comes from the siege of Numantia in Hispania, between 134 and 133 BCE. The Numantines, a small but fiercely defiant Celtiberian people, refused to submit. In response, Scipio Aemilianus, the same general who had destroyed Carthage, encircled the city with a massive wall, cutting off all external resources. Inside, conditions deteriorated quickly. No reinforcements came. No food remained. The citizens, driven to desperation, ultimately chose self-destruction over surrender. Ancient sources describe mass suicides and fires set by the inhabitants themselves rather than falling into Roman hands. In Judea too, during the siege of Jerusalem, in 70 CE, the same method was employed. Roman forces under Titus encircled the city, and within weeks, starvation gripped the population. Josephus, a contemporary historian, recorded the suffering with restrained sorrow, noting that those who died were beyond counting. Rome's etc. siege tactics were not just military, they were psychological. The message was simple. Resistance would not only bring the sword, but the slow erosion of life itself. Hunger became a policy, and waiting became its executioner. Mass enslavement. After conquest, in the Roman worldview, conquest was not complete until the defeated had been made profitable. Enslavement on a massive scale was not merely a consequence of Roman victory, it was a core feature of it. Cities that resisted Rome too strongly or held out too long were often emptied of their populations, the inhabitants sold into slavery to finance future campaigns and reward the legions. It was systemic, organized, and utterly devastating for those on the receiving end.